Hello, everyone. So today I'm joined by Ashley once again. Welcome back to the channel, Ashley.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem. Today the topic is learning to hear the dead. Now, usually when people who aren't involved in magical or shamanic rituals or don't really know a whole lot about spiritually working with the dead, they assume that you'll hear them speak auditorially. That does happen. I've experienced it before, but usually there are other senses that pick up their presence. When they finally are able to speak auditorily to you, then usually that means that they really want to reach out to you, or you've done enough to give them enough power in order to do that. But when I go to graveyards, when I'm doing my rituals, what I look for or what I sense when there's a presence is I'll start to feel it in my bones. Like all the bones in my body will get this kind of, you can say, different vibration, as if my whole body's a tuning fork, trying to tune to the different dimension that this undead, this dead person exists in at the time. Of course, we talked about soul fragmentation before, where the the ego, which can become a ghost, and then you got the spirit, which is the life force, which feeds back in everything. Then you have the soul, which cannot be contained, continuously moves on from life to life. But as far as communicating with the dead, usually I think of us communicating with ghosts, which is that part of the soul that's kind of connected to the ego. And there's a reason if a ghost exists here, it's because they're tied to this plane because of certain desires or a feeling of responsibility or just an inability to let go. But detecting these ghosts is really a full body experience. You're not just using your eardrums, you're using all of your senses, but the subtler part of your senses. So if you can yourself empty your mind of all thoughts, all the thoughts that you have, and just leave a blank slate when you start to feel that certain strange vibration in your bones, then the dead can directly insert words into your mind, and then you can save those words for later or write them down as they do so. Usually, I will try to listen to the whole story or the whole communication that somebody who's passed wants to tell me before writing it down, because I want to give them a chance to actually give me the whole message instead of me trying to repeat it by writing it down. It's a very strange feeling that's hard to understand, hard to describe. But when you get to a certain level after working with the dead for quite a while, it becomes easier and easier. I would highly recommend using dowsing rods in order to get you to the place that the spirits want you to be at, for the best communication. And now, usually the dowsing rods, they won't always lead you to the same place in the graveyard. If they do, that might have something to do with you being called by that particular grave, or maybe you're just not doing it right. It could be one of the two, but usually the dowsing rods will lead you to different areas of a graveyard, and the ley lines intersect, yes, but I really think that the spirits themselves can affect those dowsing rods, and that's one of the methods that I use to find the place where I am wanted, where the communication is wanting to be said to me, and then I kind of go there using dowsing rods. I don't use them all the time. You don't even actually need them. And as we approach this time of the veil between this world and their world is thinnest, and it's in October now. Actually, me and Ashley both have birthdays in late October. But I find that the graveyard that I go to most, I just am naturally gravitated there. Like it feels like I'm being pulled. Even if I'm miles away, I'm being pulled to this place. And the spirits that I've been talking to for quite a while, the rest of the year, are saying, okay, here's when we can actually speak to even more. Here's when we can actually communicate with you in a more effective fashion because of the time of the year, because that veil is getting thinner. So, Ashley, I'll go ahead and jump to you and ask, what are some ways that you have kind of detected the dead through your subtler senses, or maybe some experiences that you had that were very material as far as them making physical sounds and then you hearing them? Would you like to share any of that?
Okay, my first apartment that I ever lived in, there were many, many synchronicities and numeral, like there would be numbers that would pop up on the microwave by itself. Like I would walk in to the kitchen and it would be like 363636. It would just like somebody had punched numbers into the microwave. That
Hmm.
would happen a lot. I would also hear banging inside of one closet. And it got to the point where even people that were over visiting me could hear the banging inside of this closet and they'd get up and think somebody was at the front door. So for me, I've had very physical manifestations of like the dead trying to interact with me. I've also
Definitely.
had them move things around in my bedroom when I was a kid, and definitely when I was a teenager, they did that also. And then as an adult, I've seen spirits. But one of the ways that I would suggest that a person would, because I'm a psychic and I've always been a psychic, so not everybody's going to have my experience. So if they want to cultivate the ability to hear and interact with the dead, one thing that I would suggest is using tools. So the dowsing rods, like you were talking about, that's a good tool, like a psychic tool to use. Also, a lot of people use those, what are they with the little pendulum? People use
Yeah, yeah.
pendulums also. But I think the next level up from that, after you use these tools to learn to become more sensitive to the dead, is to get into your own psychic ability, your own inherent psychic abilities, which would be clairsentience, which is feeling like you can feel like it might get cold in an otherwise comfortable room all of a sudden. You might be outside and all of a sudden it feels really muggy and just there's no reason why there's this extreme temperature change. And then there's also clairgnosis, which is what you were describing, which is you just have this natural feeling within your bones, your very essence. You can't even put it in one part of the body. It's like your entire body just knows that you're interacting with a spirit. That's clairgnosis. And then clairaudience is when you hear, like you might hear something as you're falling asleep, you might hear somebody talking to you. As far as developing those, though, it's just like you have to get into your body enough to where you can feel, and I guess you just let yourself feel it, and then you will recognize what it feels like, and then you'll just build upon that, you know?
Yeah. And I've had my own, very physical experiences. There's been many nights where I'll wake up and then like one of the instances was I made this little shoebox shrine, and I would wake up, and then this happened a few times with this one shoebox shrine. It was directly next to my bed, and it wasn't close enough for me to reach it, but it was directly next to my bed, facing exactly the same way my bed was facing. And that actually happened a few times. I think one of the times, if I remember correctly, because this was a couple years ago, the shoebox shrine was actually open, and then it had the bottom shoebox, like that. It was open on the floor, and I'm a very light sleeper. If I even have the feeling to roll over while I'm sleeping, I'll wake up like that real easy.
Yeah.
But I would just find random things like directly in the same spot where I couldn't reach them from where I'm laying. I'd have to actually get up, go get that thing, then put it there, which would definitely wake me up because I'm a light sleeper. But I've had that happen with a knife as well, and a couple other objects. A few of the other things was, I've picked up stuff in my videos, which you've seen, some paranormal stuff. I definitely, for instance, when it comes to just this room, like I have my blood magic talisman, and I have that black sun organite connected to it, and I blessed it in a graveyard. Now, recently, for about a whole week, and then it stopped. I would wake up and I'd feel somebody standing right where the talisman is standing and just looking at me. Not necessarily like trying to make me feel uncomfortable or afraid, but I just felt something looking at me for like a
Yeah.
solid week, and that was interesting. When it comes down to, I've heard plenty of things auditorily as well, and there's been
Yeah.
some very strange noises like music coming through the vents that obviously shouldn't be there. There's been, of course, other things that have been moved, but really what I'm getting at is more like the subtler ways to detect the dead, because those are all very like very obvious, very material, very very
Yeah. I think the
physical
clay,
ways to detect the dead. But there's also subtler ways that
yeah.
anybody can cultivate, but also that is actually more effective, because when they're doing stuff in your physical world, you're so focused on something moving or you're hearing something that you're actually not open to communicating with the dead. But if you start to train your subtler senses and be able to clear your mind properly,
Yeah.
then you'll actually receive more information and not just some weird
Yeah.
thing happening, receiving information.
Yeah, meditation helps a lot so that we can quiet the egoic mind enough and pull ourselves out of the front neocortex area of the brain and go to a different area of the brain where we can connect with the sixth sense, which would be connected to the clairgnosis, the clairsentience, the clairaudience. So we have to quiet our egoic mind before we can, connect to that sixth sense, to the psychic ability, so that we can hear the dead easier. Otherwise, people can use tools, but I still kind of question whether a person's using their ego or not when they're using the tools. So I think it's really important, regardless, to practice meditation and kind of get through the egoic mind in order to have a clear filter
That
So
makes sense. Oftentimes when I'm just everyday walking around, I feel like my consciousness in the front, but when I'm especially open, which in Hinduism the ego is actually at the very back of the skull. I think it's the medulla oblongata. But
yeah,
I find when I pull myself back from the frontal, the frontal cortex, um, that I'm way more open and perceptive. Like it could be like the good side of the ego that you're more placed in your strong sense of self, and you're
yeah,
still quiet because you're bringing all the energy back. So you're still quiet, but
yeah.
you're very solid in who you are and what you are at the time. So you're
Well,
receptive from that point, and you feel things that can actually like come into your mind. You can feel those energies trying to communicate with you because you vacated that part, and then they feel like they can actually reach you because they can go
yeah.
through that part and reach to the back.
Well, when we look at our brain, like I have my camera off, but I have my hand on my head right now. So okay, so the front of the brain, this neocortex, which is very much like about philosophical thought, these higher human ideals, like where we're thinking, and then the ego, like you were saying, that could be in the back of the brain, which is where the reptilian part of the brain is. So that'd be a real base level egoic mind back there. Now the middle part is where the mammalian, the mammal part of the brain develops. So it makes sense that if we go into that animal part of our brain, it's the mammal part though, it's not the reptilian part, would be in the middle, right, directly underneath the crown chakra, which would probably be, I believe, where the pineal gland is. Because I
Pineal.
know yeah, because I know that one's basically right in the middle of the brain, like it's just in there. So it makes sense if you pull your consciousness and kind of have it resonate right in that area, that it'd be a little less ego driven and it would be a little less you know, too analytical like humans can get, which would be the very front of the brain, is we get really philosophical and too analytical. So it's a more instinctual level if we pull it into the middle area.
So I think that whether we pull it to the reptilian brain or the very potent center of the brain, I think that getting away from where we usually are, altering our consciousness by bringing it to something that's more
Hmm.
basic, can actually,
Yeah.
like, reptiles are very open to spirits as well, and so are animals,
Yeah.
more so than us.
Yeah.
So even if you pull it back to the reptile brain, you're more receptive to a deeper nature, the more
Yeah.
basic nature, but it's a nature that doesn't assume that there's a difference between here and wherever the dead are.
Yeah. And maybe for people that reside more in the reptilian area of their brain, maybe it's better if they pull it forward. So maybe it's about playing with consciousness and where the resonance is. So maybe
Well,
depending on the person, they need to move their consciousness around.
now, the reptilian brain, nobody's ever just exists there, like very few people. If you don't use any other part of your brain and you're just in the reptilian,
You'd
you
be
might
very
be more
fight
open,
or
like I
flight.
said, but you wouldn't be able to speak. You'd be kind of like a reactive animal. So nobody just exists in the reptilian brain as far as I'm concerned because you'd be just that. You
It
just
would
be
just
that.
be
You
a
wouldn't be
prime.
able to communicate. You wouldn't be able to think. So, but
Yeah,
there are people who, of course, they have more of their activity in the reptilian
yeah.
brain, but they still have that frontal. So it's a kind of a
Yeah,
combination of placement of consciousness rather than somebody just existing in one part.
yeah. I was meaning more where their primary consciousness is, because like a person that has a lot of fight or flight might exist more like in the mammal, like the amygdala area or the reptilian area of the brain. But yeah, they're not going to operate specifically just from that one area. It's going to be
Yeah,
multiple areas. But I think it's just playing with consciousness and really getting in touch with the body and consciousness in order to develop your psychic abilities, is what I
that
think
makes
it's
sense.
about.
In closing, because it's going to kind of be a short video, I would like to bring up two things before we have some closing thoughts. One is that this shrine, as far as like how I made it, what it's composed of, exactly from a big piece of wood to this as it is now, will be up very soon. Also, another video that will be up very soon is I'm going to make my own spiritual oil. I've never done this before, but I got the organic olive oil, I got the jar, and I got plenty of herbs that I'm going to actually combine to make my own spiritual oil. So anybody watching this, please stay tuned. You'll be able to see that. Um, so in closing here, Ashley, do you think that the average person do you think that the average person has enough potential to communicate with the dead, to as long as they work hard, they'll be able to achieve that point where communication with the dead is just fluent. Like it's very easy as long as you're willing to put the work in. Do you think that that's possible, or do you think that some people just will not naturally be able to do that?
Well, I think that everyone can work at it hard enough to where they will be able to work with the dead on some level. I think some people have a more natural ability with it, and other people, it's just like sports. Some people are more naturally inclined with sports. So with spirituality and with working with the dead, I think anyone can better themselves and interact with, their ancestors or the dead if that's what they want to do. And it just might take them more effort if they're, maybe a little less spiritually inclined.
That makes sense. I think I agree with that wholeheartedly. But at any rate, thank you very much for joining me once again, Ashley.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Anybody who has any questions, comments, concerns, maybe you think that this isn't possible. Maybe you think that, okay, I can definitely do this. How do I do it exactly? Feel free to shoot down comments in the comment section below. Love to hear them. That thumbs up down there really helps out the channel as well. And I hope to see all of you on the channel in the future.